We're so grateful you could join us tonight for this next edition of Acting for Justice While Sheltering in Place. We've been doing these Thursday night presentations for the last several months, trying to address a felt need by many of our Just Faith graduates of how can we be responsive, helpful, and active during this very unusual time of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're delighted you could join us tonight. We have a special treat, and I just want to say I'm delighted that we could host Bill O'Keefe from Catholic Relief Services. Just Faith Ministries has enjoyed a very, very generative and powerful relationship with CRS over the years, and we're just delighted that Bill could be with us tonight. So before I go on, let me offer a prayer, and the prayer that I've selected tonight actually comes out of a prayer book that Catholic Relief Services published several years ago, and this particular prayer is entitled Blessed Are. Blessed are those who are on the move, transforming exodus and flight in energy for a new search. From the victims will come the protagonists of history. Blessed are those who suffer pain, nostalgia, and loneliness, yet know how to make of every arrival a new beginning. They shall act with faith, hope, and life. Blessed are those who open borders and mix the anthems, the flags, races, and creeds without discrimination. They make the world everyone's home. Blessed the wayfarers of all roads. In the tears, sweat, and work of their hands, they prepare a tomorrow of justice and right. Blessed are those who open the door to pilgrims, making solidarity the passport to our common homeland. They are constructing a new citizenship. Blessed are those who foment encounters and re-encounters, sowing peace. They will harvest flowers and stars in the new heaven and the new earth. And blessed are the excluded, without opportunities and without voice. They will be the first guests in the great banquet, where bread will not be lacking on anyone's table. Amen. I'm going to introduce our speaker in just a moment, but to kind of frame my introduction, I just want to recall, some of you may know this history, that in the very, very early days of Just Faith Ministries National, shortly after we became a national organization in the year 2000, Catholic Relief Services became almost immediately a partner, an ally with Just Faith Ministries. And I was giving a workshop about 2 years later, and a woman came up to me at the break, and she said, you know, if somebody had come up to me and asked the question, are you proud to be Catholic? She would have said, I'm not sure I know exactly how to answer that question. I'm not sure that I've ever had it framed that way before. But then she went on to say, but because I went through the Just Faith program and I learned all about Catholic Relief Services, now I can say I'm very proud to be Catholic. Such is the work, such is the impact, such are the effects of Catholic Relief Services ministry all over the world. And tonight we're delighted to have a representative from Catholic Relief Services, Bill O'Keefe. Bill is Catholic Relief Services Executive Vice President for Mission, Mobilization, and Advocacy. Based in CRS's headquarters in Baltimore, Bill oversees CRS efforts to change U.S. foreign policy in ways that promote justice and reduce poverty overseas. And this involves lobbying Congress and the administration on a range of foreign policy issues and engaging the Catholic constituency in this country around international issues and involving them in public campaigns for policy change. Bill received his bachelor's degree from Yale, his master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. He joined CRS in 1987 as a project manager in Tanzania, designing and monitoring community development projects. But he served in a variety of capacities for CRS and has led CRS government relations efforts since 2003. Bill, we are so appreciative for you taking the time to be with us tonight. Thank you so much, and the microphone is all yours.
Thank you so much, Chapt, for that very kind introduction, and it's really wonderful to be with all of you tonight, and I hope you're all well and healthy. I'm going to just share my screen, and I have a PowerPoint, so just give me 30 seconds, and hopefully all will be well. And okay, can everybody see the screen? Wonderful. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about the COVID response at CRS, and then how we're responding in the U.S. and ways to get involved that I think can make a real difference in the lives of poor and vulnerable people around the world, particularly those who are suffering at this very unique time. This is a unique time. It's really a pivotal moment in time. There are more displaced people than at any point in recent history. A staggering 70 million people are on the move. Chronic hunger and malnutrition are on the rise again after actually a long period of pretty steady decline in the number of hungry and malnourished people. That number is now climbing. Our global issues are big, they're complex, they're interrelated, many multifaceted root causes. And in some ways it makes us all feel powerless to do anything. And COVID-19 is a compounding factor. As Pope Francis and certainly others have commented, it's aggravated the core inequities and injustices that many in the world already were experiencing, and have unfortunately made that worse. You can imagine for the Rohingya fleeing from Bangladesh, running away from COVID is not possible. And conditions that refugees, migrants, and many others find themselves in makes it especially difficult to survive in this era. CRS has responded in a number of different ways. First, we're providing basic training and supplies for our church and other partners around the world so that staff can safely continue their work, our partners can safely continue their work. As you would imagine, malaria and HIV and hunger are not waiting for the COVID epidemic to pass. So we're doing everything we can to keep our ongoing work going, and in a way that both our staff and our partners are safe. We're doing a lot of basic education around how to prevent the transmission of COVID, how you can protect yourself. These cute kids are in Cambodia. I was in Cambodia actually in February. It was one of the last normal things I did before the lockdown, and I got a hand washing lesson, which is, believe me, I do not wash my hands the same way I used to. These kids taught me the correct WHO hand washing technique, and but it's really, really important, particularly in places, many places where CRS operates don't even have soap. So in addition to providing education, we're providing basic supplies for hygiene and safety, as well as there's a lot of disinformation everywhere, including here, obviously. And so we're doing everything we can with our local church partners to push back against this disinformation, misunderstanding of the disease. Caritas partners are providing basic medical care as well, caring for the elderly, doing so in a safe way, all those vulnerable people who need help. We're using technology in order to more safely administer our work. Here's an example of a young gentleman with a card that entitles him to participate in the program and has a QR code. And so the woman whose the camera is over her right shoulder there she has a reader, and she's able to just scan that code, and that indicates who he is and that he's a participant. One of the things that hasn't been as understood as well is in many of the countries around the world, the shutdown and the economic impacts of the shutdown are more serious so far than the spread of the pandemic. And so as countries lock down, vulnerable families, families with disabled children, needed a lot of economic support, food, clothing, and cash so that they can continue to survive. Those countries don't have, that the Congress doesn't pass a paycheck protection program, and so they rely on groups like CRS to help the most vulnerable. In addition to those steps that we've taken, I just wanted to give you a sense of how our operations have changed. This is a picture of a food distribution in Uganda, and before the coronavirus. And so people are close together, they're directly interacting, they're touching, and conversing directly. But after, we've taken steps to limit the number of people at a time, schedule things more rigorously, provide chalk lines or circles where folks can stand at a safe distance apart. And so we've had to take some real serious steps, again, to protect those who we're serving, as well as our partners and staff. This is really a time for all of us to respond to Pope Francis's call to be leaders of thought, leaders of action, leaders of joy, leaders of hope especially, and leaders in the construction of a better world. I think we are really trying to respond to that call. And it's been really an interesting time. I've told our team that for many years we've looked to our colleagues around the world who are responding to disasters, like colleagues in the Philippines, who, while responding to a typhoon, are also evacuating their own families and are trying to arrange for the protection of their own children. And we've been so proud of our colleagues and our partners, of how they've been able to balance the provision of charity and God's help to other people while still having to manage their own lives and their own families in the midst of a disaster. And this is really the first disaster where we too in the United States are both part of the response to the disaster and are experiencing it. And it's hard. It is really hard. And I've grown in my own appreciation for my colleagues who've been doing this for years, and in my respect for the fortitude that it takes, because like all of you, I'm sure I feel anxious, I feel afraid, I feel concerned. And so it's just a really, really tough time. What we found, though, which is so interesting, but really obvious for those of us who are followers of Jesus, is that the only way out of the anxiety and fear that we all experience is to find a way to reach out and help other people. That's really what the gospel tells us, is if we, those who are concerned about themselves have a much harder time in Jesus's view than those who are concerned about others. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, my team, we had these long discussions about, well, should we continue to try to invite people to participate in supporting our programs around the world? Should we continue to invite people to advocate? And we decided to take a risk because our intuition was that we were all sitting in our homes feeling powerless, feeling afraid, and that we actually could offer people an opportunity to have some agency, to do something meaningful for other people. And that in that we were also saving ourselves from that just bleak feeling that I know almost all of us had early on. So I'm going to talk a little bit. And then the other thing we learned is that, again, counterintuitively, our friends in the Congress on both sides and their staff were actually more available by Zoom than in person. And we were able to set up meetings and opportunities for advocacy more easily because they weren't flying back and forth, and they weren't doing as many fundraising dinners because they couldn't have dinner with anybody. So counterintuitively, we found that this is actually a really good time to do the kind of work that we're doing, and a really important one given the needs around the world. CRS has embarked on a movement building strategy, and I think movement building is like so many of these kind of phrases nowadays in our culture become sort of cliche. So I'm going to just tell you what we mean by that is an organized way of involving many more people in the mission of global solidarity. And we're doing a couple of things. We've kind of reorganized our work in the US around mobilizing and training, providing leadership development training for particularly youth and young adults, and then organizing chapters and clubs of interested high school, college, and then people in parishes committed to working together on addressing causes of justice and poverty around the world, injustice and poverty, providing opportunities for advocacy and providing opportunities for fundraising as part of issue-based campaigns. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that this evening. So I want to just quickly talk about these chapters. And chapter 2 is a metaphor for really a group of people who are interested in forming a community of missionary disciples to take action on key global issues to transform our world for the common good. These chapters, we've developed a methodology to support chapters to implement our campaigns, and I'll talk about that in a minute. This is a chapter in the Diocese of San Bernadino that's formed. Leaders of the chapter in our methodology meet for an initial reflection period, and then we provide a 4-week training to develop chapter members. And then we have a system of support and engaging those chapter members in a process of advocacy and in action for indefinitely. And so it's a new approach, and we found that people at this time are particularly, of course, we designed it for people to meet in person, but it actually works extremely well as I think Layla was talking about your Just Faith resources. We figured out how to do this methodology virtually. The cycle is a 4-month cycle for starters, where there's a conversation with key stakeholders, leaders, diocesan directors, or interested leaders. Then there is, in the first month, a call with a potential chapter host, someone who's interested in considering organizing a chapter. We hold an inviting team call with prospective members, and then a launch followed by a series of trainings. And after that, the chapter is able to, with an ongoing system of monthly calls and other support and action sheets that we provide, to grow in their spirituality and to engage in meaningful action on behalf of those around the world. We're trying to build a continuum of chapters, clubs in high schools, chapters in universities, and then in parishes and other groups of interested adults, so that people in high school can, if they're so interested and have a good experience, can continue to be involved in chapters at university, and then as adults. And we're trying to figure out how to help that baton get passed as people get older, so that they don't disappear and are still involved in this kind of important social ministry. Our goal is to build a network of chapters around the country, and also regionally and in states, so that each chapter takes action on its own, but then also periodically can come together to take larger action and a more impactful action, And then nationally, when we have hundreds and eventually thousands of chapters, the opportunity to really make a difference at scale across the country. I want to just talk a little bit about our campaigns. We have two campaigns that we've started. It's again a way of organizing our activities in a structured way, in a synchronized way to make a difference. Our first campaign is around migration. I really loved, Jack, the opening prayer, which I know came from CRS, so of course I love it, but it's the theme of being on the move and the vulnerability of people on the move. It's so emblematic of our time. So many people on the move who are vulnerable. Our goal is that people on the move can exercise their right to lead safe and dignified lives and ultimately to thrive. How? Well, we're going to try to address some of the root causes for why people are on the move, particularly from a perspective of what our country can do to address those causes. For example, in Central America, how can we help those countries so that people are able to live dignified lives there and make the choice to stay, and make the choice if they can find, live a meaningful life there and support their families. And then seek long-lasting and holistic solutions for those on the move, so that people who have had to move, who have had to make that choice, that there are long-lasting solutions, so that wherever they find themselves, they're not just in some sort of a limbo for decades, but instead live meaningful lives. These are two boys in Iraq, Sam and Majd. They are best friends. They were best friends. They played together and lived in the same village. But when ISIS came and destroyed their village, they were displaced. And like many children who are displaced by violence, they experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. They lost some of their education time. And they had to move around. They had to flee from village to village and finally into a refugee camp. And there, CRS was able to assist them through at what's called a child-friendly space, where a trained local leader, this wonderful young woman, used interesting techniques to help Maj and Sam to work through what they had experienced, to come to terms with the violence that they had seen, to re-engage with their learning, to develop the emotional coping skills which they needed, so that they felt strong and confident and like Spider-Man, I guess. I think that's a Spider-Man shirt Sam has on there. But it's clearly, you can see in his eyes, this is a boy who feels like he can move forward with his life and with his education. And here they are at a birthday party celebrating together. And it's really just an example at a very human level of the kind of assistance that we want to provide and we want our government to provide at scale, and which our campaign on migration is advocating for. Imagine if every kid had that opportunity, every kid who was fleeing, and what a happier world eventually we would be living in when we have children who are not traumatized and who are set up for success, however and wherever they may end up. Our second campaign is called Lead the Way on Hunger, and here we're trying to help people to achieve the conditions to be free from hunger, to achieve optimal nutrition, and ultimately to thrive. Particularly in children, addressing hunger is a complicated activity. It's not just a question of feeding people; it's a question of making sure folks have adequate nutrition, adequate cognitive development, adequate parenting, a whole range of activities that go into healthy children and addressing hunger. We're trying to build resiliency to climate shocks, especially with sustainable farming practices. Climate change is recognized everywhere in the world except in the Beltway in the United States, I'm sorry to say. If you go anywhere where CRS is working and you talk to a farmer and you ask them about climate change, they will tell you all the ways the climate is changing for them. How it used to rain in August and now it doesn't. It used to rain a certain amount, and it either rains more or it rains less. The crops that for generations they grew no longer grow. The yields have gone down. Everywhere you go, they will tell you their story of how climate change is impacting them, and we are trying to help those farmers become more resilient to those shocks. Help them also create viable and sustainable livelihood solutions in order to take into account the changing context of our world. Again, the climate, increasing urbanization, any number of other conditions. And finally, improving nutrition for those first 1,000 days of life, from conception to age 2, where there's such important cognitive and physical development that really is critical. And then, of course, we provide life-saving emergency food assistance where needed. This is Guarencia and her daughter Natasha in Kenya. It's a lovely picture. I spent a lot of time in Kenya. It's actually one of my favorite countries. And she is part of, after Natasha was born, when Natasha was 3 months old, she joined a mother's group, and which was supported by CRS, where she learned about the importance of a balanced diet and nutrition and hygiene in order to grow up healthy and safe. She learned about the kinds of vegetables that provide the most nutritious diet and how to prepare them in ways that preserve the nutritional value. She learned about different aspects of positive parenting and communication with her spouse, so that the family was a safe and supportive environment for Natasha to grow up and be healthy. Guarencia has been passionate about what she learned, and she's decided to become a leader of and to start other mothers groups for other women in the community, and her passion is helping others like her to raise strong and healthy children, and it's a wonderful success when people who participate take that and help others. And imagine if children, again, had every child had that kind of access to the knowledge and the learning and the food, the right balance of food, where they could grow up to live their full potential and develop their minds and their bodies. We're really trying to invite people to advocate in order to address those conditions of hunger and migration that I talked about. And so our Lead the Way campaign is focusing on congressional advocacy. Virtually, we've had, again, amazing success through our campaigns. This is a wonderful picture of some university students. We organized this summer a Virtual Voices conference for 167, or maybe it was 176, I can't remember which of the two it was, but 170 or so college students from 60 Catholic colleges and universities came together for 2 days of conversation, learning, training, and then an afternoon of virtual advocacy. These kids are advocating with Senator Feinstein's office. They're well prepared, they're excited, and they've had a fantastic conversation about a bill called the Global Child Thrive Act. The Global Child Thrive Act is a bill we're working on right now, actually, and it takes some of these lessons of how to support children at the beginning of their lives in terms of early childhood development, nutrition, and education, and it makes them practices across the U.S. government. It turns out that CRS, I think in part as a Catholic organization, our intuition was just that strengthening families and strengthening nutrition in the context of families would make a real difference. We ran programs like that around the world, did a lot of data-driven evaluation, and it turned out we could prove that there were much better outcomes for children if you brought together the suite of activities as part of any work that you do with that age group. And the Global Child Thrive Act will require our government to integrate those practices into all the work that they're doing with children. There's a version in the House and the Senate, and we are actively fighting for the next couple of months to make sure that these bills make it over the finish line. We're also working on, and that will allow this absolutely beautiful child to grow and thrive and become a healthy adult. We're also working right now on the supplemental appropriations bill for the COVID response. You may well be aware of the stalemate between the Republican and Democratic leadership around an additional stimulus package, and that would make a big difference domestically. But we're also arguing that there should be a substantial international portion, certainly less than 1% of the total. But we can't defeat a pandemic anywhere if we don't defeat it everywhere. If there's one thing we've learned in the last 6 months, is that disease knows no borders. And no matter what you do, our government has certainly tried to close our borders, and it certainly hasn't kept us safe. So we need to be doing a lot more around the world to prevent the transmission and of COVID-19, and to help people who have suffered because of the lockdowns. Our campaign, if you're interested, just text ACT to 306-44, and it'll get you involved. We also, in addition to those advocacy activities, have opportunities for community fundraising, and I won't get into them, but if you're interested in supporting the work that we are doing around the world and the kinds of responses I've talked about, and I'll show you a web page in a second, but there you'll find resources that can be useful for communities who are interested in engaging in fundraising to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and care for and heal the sick. So CRS.org/lead-the-way is our campaign website, and there's a set of resources that will enable folks to pray, to encounter through learning those that are experiencing hunger and are on the move, and then opportunities to take action, toolkits, action calendars, advocacy opportunities. And I would invite all of you to take a look, and again, to take a look at CRS.org/lead-the-way, and to visit our Action Center where all those resources are. You can, as I said, either go to CRS.org/lead-the-way or text LEAD NOW, or if you want, you can text ACT to 306-44. With that, I would love to open it up for questions and engage in dialogue.
Thanks, Bill. Again, just to repeat Leela's instructions, if anybody has a question, please go ahead and send your question to me, Jack Jezreel, and I will sort through them and pass them on to Bill. So let's see. Bill, here's a question. What kinds of challenges or problems do you face with programs serving people with AIDS during a pandemic? Are there special considerations that you have to navigate in that case?
So that is a really good question. Thank you. There are two types of problems. The first is, as you know from your experience in our country, people who are immunocompromised in any way are more vulnerable to COVID-19, and their potential outcomes are more serious. And so we have to do everything we can in our interactions with people who are HIV positive to make sure to lower the risk to them of transmission. And that really involves, one, making sure that they understand what their risks are, that they understand how to prevent, to protect themselves from COVID-19. So that's the first set of issues, is how to protect them, and how to make sure that we do not accidentally, by assisting them, don't accidentally transmit the disease to them, to COVID to them, which would be terrible. The second thing is, there's just a lot more supply chain issues in providing the antiretroviral medications. As borders have closed, as airplane flights have been cut back, as shipping has cut back, it's just been more difficult to get anything from point A to point B, both from one country to the next, but also within country. In most of the countries where CRS operates, we and our partners have been deemed essential services, so that even when there have been strict lockdowns, it's been possible to send staff to clinics to provide medication and to provide support. We've had to learn how to do some of that support virtually in countries that have a good internet system or a strong cell phone system. We've been able to provide the same sort of virtual support, telemedicine that we have here. But it's been very challenging and to adapt country to country, because every country is different. So I hope that gives you a sense. It definitely has been an additional challenge and an additional burden. I think we've kind of figured out how to adapt and work our way through it, but it's something that's taken a lot of work and a lot of consideration.
Thanks, Bill. Let's see, several just popped in. Let me take a look at them real fast. Well, here's a practical question, Bill, kind of a matter of strategy. One of our participants is asking the question, if somebody wrote months ago to their congressperson asking for advocacy for the Global Child Thrive Act, should that person write a second time, or would it be better to write only once on this topic to each senator and representative? So that's kind of a tactical question, effectiveness. Yeah, good question. I think it depends on a couple things. First, right now, if your member has, who you wrote to, has co-sponsored the bill, then I think in terms of building your own long-term relationship with that member, it's a great idea to write them and thank them, and just recognize that them for thanking the bill, thank them for co-sponsoring the bill. And then urge them to urge the leadership in the Senate or the House, depending on what we're talking about here, to make sure the bill is passed by the end of this session. I think it's always a good idea to, on an ongoing piece of legislation, to write more than once, because it helps to build the relationship, and it helps them to see that you are paying attention. And that you're not just kind of a one-shot wonder, you're that you are watching. And I think that there's an added set of accountability that comes with writing again. If the member hasn't co-sponsored the bill yet, then I think it's great to write again and say, I see you haven't yet taken the step. We're getting to the end of the session. I want you to know, when I wrote you before, everything that I believe even more strongly in this era of COVID-19. The children who I want to help are in an even worse situation, and I think the case is even stronger now. I think in your own words, making that case would be impactful, and I think a really great thing to do. Great. Here's an interesting question, Bill. Will CRS have any role to play if and when a vaccine is created? Will CRS play a role in that kind of distribution? Yeah, that's a great question. And we are talking about that right now. It's how this vaccine will be distributed around the world is not clear right now. United States decided not to participate in what's called COVAX, which is a coordinated global effort between the WHO, something called CEPI, and the Gavi, which is a global vaccine distribution and development organization. And so the US isn't participating. Seems like every country is kind of going on its own.
So we are actively talking about how our network in many countries that's providing malaria net distribution around the country, how that could be repurposed to help distribute a vaccine when one becomes available. So I can't say for sure how it'll work out because I don't think anybody really knows what the global system will be at this point, unfortunately. We are actively looking towards how we can play a role and how all the projects and programs and partners that we have could be part of the infrastructure so that vaccines can be distributed as quickly, as effectively, and as efficiently as possible. It's a great question.
We have someone on our call tonight who's a donor to CRS and is interested to know if you have a favorite story about CRS impact in one place or another that you would be willing to share with everybody tonight.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna. This is. I'm gonna tell a story that. I was in Macedonia. This was in 2016, and so it's 2015 maybe. It was at the kind of the worst point of the Syrian refugee crisis. So 1 million refugees have left. They're flowing through from different parts of the Middle East to Syria, through Turkey, by water to Greece, and then up through Greece to Macedonia, and then to Serbia, and then on to Europe. And I went to Serbia, Macedonia, and Greece to take a look at CRS's refugee programs. And on December 18th, I was at the Macedonia-Serbia border on the Macedonia side. And there, every day, a train with 1,000 people would come across Macedonia, stop at the border, and open its doors, and 1,000 people would come out. And they would all, they were all on the way. They were all eventually going to walk across the border into Serbia. And CRS and our local partners, the Caritas organization and several other local groups, had established a reception center there. So when people got off the train, they needed new clothes because as they moved north, it was getting colder and they were unprepared. They needed food for the journey. Some of them needed health care because they were falling sick. Some of them needed legal assistance because they had various issues and problems. So many of them would just continue walking into Serbia, but many would stop and get services. That day, I was introduced to a woman who a couple days before had gone into labor on the train. She was traveling alone with 4 young children and then went into labor with her 5th. And I just imagine, I'm not a woman obviously, but I thought, what would it be like that the sense of vulnerability and fear to go into labor with 4 young children on a train with 1,000 people you do not know, in a country you do not know, going to a country you do not know. She got off the platform and she was met by our partner staff and gave birth in this little health clinic that we had built. And I was standing there and it just came to me, it's Advent and this is Mary and we have provided her with a room at the inn. And if Jesus came today, he would come as a refugee and that we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. This may not be the most impactful story or example I've seen. I have gone to food distributions in the middle of wars. I have seen agricultural programs where tens of thousands of people were able to feed their families better. I have been a part of education programs for whole districts of parts of countries where children have been empowered to learn, their families to be engaged in their education. But this story to me, in terms of my faith, is the most impactful thing that's happened in some ways in my entire life because it communicated to me why God wants us to help these folks now. And so that is my answer.
Oh, thanks. Bill, I've gotten several questions related to politics. Can you imagine that? And I think maybe the best way to package this question is, given your role in trying to impact U.S. policy and your interaction with politicians across both aisles, across the aisle, can you give us any tips or wisdom about how to engage in the political conversation at a time when things are so divided and so polarized?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we all have a responsibility, particularly those of us people of faith, not to be pulled into the polarization and the partisanship. And so here, my advice is, first of all, I mean, there are really good people when you get them off by themselves and out in front of a camera. Really good people on both sides who want to do something good on most of these issues. Traditionally, the kinds of things that I've been talking about so far are bipartisan, and that there's been a bipartisan consensus that the U.S. has a responsibility to do more around the world. Obviously, I assume most of you think we can and should do more. But part of what we're doing is we're helping them to see that there's support within their districts and in their constituents to do what in their heart they know they should be doing. And so the more that you talk personally about why is really important, why you as a citizen, as a constituent, as a resident, and as an American, and as a Catholic or as a whatever, why you think it's so important that our country do more and do whatever you're advocating for, that's just really important. I think it's important to tell a story that one of the things that I think about when I'm going into a congressional office is like, whoever I'm meeting with has got sort of a series of half-an-hour meetings all day. So what can I say that when that person puts their head down on the pillow that night, that they're going to remember? And it's going to be a story. It's going to be the story of the woman who got off the train and U.S. assistants gave her a room at the inn. That is going to stick into someone's mind. So if you have a story from that you can somehow connect your experience, something you've seen, something about your children or something about your parents or your life that connects to the issue you're advocating, that will stick in the person's head. And that's really what you want to do. You got to think about, like, how do I get my idea into this person's head and then pour some glue on it so it sticks. Mm-hmm. And it's the emotional part that's going to make it stick. It's not going to be a bunch of data unless you have like a super compelling figure. It's going to be the emotional part. Yeah, there's a few thoughts.
Great. Thanks, Bill. I'm cognizant of time, and there's 24 more questions which we won't get to tonight. But I want to just thank you again for making the time to be with us. And while everybody's on mute, we still have a way of showing our gratitude. And so I'd invite everybody to show your hands and give Bill a round of applause or silent applause.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jack. And if you send your questions to Layla, I'm happy to take a look at them. And if they're ones that I think I can, give some particular insight to, I'd be glad to respond to them. So I'm always happy to help. Thank you so much for your support. Those of you who are donors, greatly appreciate it. And we invite your partnership and thanks for all that you're doing. Amen.
Thanks, Bill. Anticipating your being with us, as I mentioned, I pulled out my CRS prayer book, and a prayer that I've actually been using all week long. You'd never guess that I'm at about, who can say how many Zoom meetings in the course of a week, but in any event, this is a prayer that I've been using over and over again. I love it so much. So let us pray. To have hope is to believe that history continues open to the dream of God and to human creativity. To have hope is to continue affirming that it is possible to dream a different world without hunger, without injustice, without discrimination. To have hope is to be a courier of God and courier of men and women of goodwill, tearing down walls, destroying borders, and building bridges. To have hope is to believe in the revolutionary potential of faith, is to leave the door open so that the Spirit can enter and make all things new. To have hope is to believe that life wins over death. To have hope is to believe that hope cannot die. To have hope is to live. Amen. And thank you all for being with us tonight. God bless.